Prince William entered the room carrying a cream-colored jeweler's file that immediately altered the atmosphere. This was no public ceremony and no formal court session. It was described as a private family review, yet the presence of two senior custodians made clear that questions of ownership and provenance were under examination. King Charles sat at the head of the table. Camilla was present. Catherine remained quiet. The custodians, whose professional duty was the precise knowledge of every historic piece of royal jewelry, had been invited for a reason. William placed the folder on the table without immediate comment. He opened it, turned the first page toward his father, and allowed the documentation to speak. The pearls in question had never belonged to Camilla. They had been formally designated for Princess Charlotte through a written family inheritance instruction recorded years earlier. The sentence on the page carried legal and household weight inside the palace. This was not a temporary reservation or a general vault allocation. It was a named future recipient. Someone had written Charlotte's name into the record long before the present moment, and that notation held force. Camilla's first response was a short laugh and the suggestion of an administrative error. Such a reaction is understandable when paperwork contradicts expectation. William did not argue. He simply drew out the second page and set it beside the first. The inventory numbers matched, the jeweler's marks aligned. The references from separate sources confirmed one another. What had been dismissed as possible clerical confusion now appeared as consistent documentation. Charles read the final paragraph twice. His fingers slowed on the paper. He lowered the page without speaking. Camilla ceased looking at William and watched her husband instead. The silence that followed from the king proved heavier than any spoken challenge. William continued in the same measured tone. The provenance file contained more than a simple designation. A handwritten cross-reference linked the pearl set to an older royal inventory created before Charlotte's birth. That older record had later been deliberately updated. Someone had made a conscious decision to attach the young princess's name to the specific set. The action was intentional, not accidental. Camilla's assertion that she had received no warning became difficult to sustain once the deliberate nature of the notation was established. The record existed in more than one place. When William revealed this detail, Camilla rose too quickly. Her expression changed. She reached for the edge of the table, missed it, and collapsed back into the chair. Charles moved toward her. Catherine remained still. William stopped speaking. One of the custodians then broke the silence and stated that the jeweler's file was only the beginning. Another document existed, and that page explained why Charlotte had been chosen. Royal jewelry of this kind is never merely an accessory worn to dinner. Inside the household, historic pieces function as symbols of continuity, inheritance, and family memory. When a set is designated for a specific person, particularly a minor, it is protected by procedure, guardianship, and recorded instruction. Ceremonial use permits a royal to wear an item for an event without altering underlying ownership. An inheritance instruction is different. It creates a named future claim. Charlotte's name stood in that category. Camilla's request to move the pearl set from long-term family reserve into her personal ceremonial rotation therefore created a direct conflict between temporary access and permanent designation. Once a piece enters regular rotation, public and internal association begins to shift. The next generation's claim, though intact on paper, can weaken in practice. Months earlier, after a late jewelry review, most aides had departed. Camilla remained with a senior wardrobe official and a single handwritten inventory sheet. Nothing dramatic occurred. No voices were raised. Yet that private exchange later proved to be the precise point at which the pearls began to move toward a different category. Camilla asked that the set be transferred from long-term reserve into her ceremonial rotation ahead of the next state occasion. She treated the matter as routine business. Historic jewels are regularly checked for maintenance, insurance, and ceremonial readiness. Camilla had worn pieces linked to earlier generations before, so the request itself did not appear immediately unusual. The official noticed Charlotte's initials already written beside the inventory number. She hesitated and asked whether additional authorization might be required before any transfer. Camilla looked at the sheet, paused, and replied that the matter would be clarified internally. She slid the paper back across the desk. No argument followed, yet the silence that remained felt wrong. The official did not process the transfer. Later that evening, she returned to the record, studied the notation again, and grew concerned that it represented an inheritance restriction rather than a storage code. She copied the inventory number and privately contacted the jewelers responsible for the historic collection, requesting the original ownership documentation. The jewelers matched the number to the exact pearl set. Their archived records confirmed the handwritten inheritance notation, a sealed family instruction named Princess Charlotte as the eventual eventual recipient. The pearls had not simply been placed in reserve, they had been preserved for her. 3 separate sources, the inventory initials, the jeweler's confirmation, and the sealed instruction, now pointed to the same conclusion. Camilla's request had already been made. The question was no longer whether she knew of the notation, but what she chose to do after the official pointed it out. According to the later record, she stated that the matter would be clarified internally and continued. When William learned of the discrepancy, the wardrobe official brought the papers to his office in person. He read the inventory sheet, then the jeweler's confirmation. His expression hardened. He decided at once that Camilla would hear of the discovery neither through an aide, nor through a memo, nor through the king. She would hear it directly from him. That decision produced the family meeting with the cream-colored file on the table. Throughout the discussion, William spoke with the controlled precision of an heir. Then he pushed the certification toward Camilla and asked a single question. If Charlotte's name was already attached to the pearls, why had the attempt been made to place them inside another ceremonial collection? At that moment, the tone shifted. William began to speak not as prince or heir, but as a father. He explained that ceremonial use and permanent entitlement are not the same. A royal may wear an item for an occasion without owning it. An inheritance designation means the named person holds the future claim. Charlotte's name could not be set aside simply because easier access was desired. Charles raised a hand before the exchange could intensify. He warned that family disputes over historic possessions become destructive when emotion replaces procedure. The king wanted facts, yet even he could not remove the personal weight from the room. The matter was no longer about storage. It concerned whether a granddaughter's documented inheritance had been knowingly challenged. William turned fully toward Camilla. He stated that he could have accepted a misunderstanding or confusion over an inventory code. What he could not accept was the continuation of the request after Charlotte's name had already been noticed. The initial inquiry might have been error. Once the official pointed out the initials and Camilla replied that the matter would be clarified internally, the error became a choice. That choice was what he could not forgive. Camilla replied sharply that she had never tried to take anything from a child. She accused the prince of turning a household request into public humiliation within the family. She insisted she had believed further clarification was still required. Her voice hardened as she looked toward Charles, clearly expecting intervention. William did not retreat. He removed one further photocopy from the folder and placed it beside Camilla's hand. She stared at it, but refused to touch the page. Instead, she pushed her chair backward, creating distance between herself and the evidence. The notation was dated. The wardrobe official had recorded that Camilla had been specifically informed of Charlotte's initials before the transfer request continued. That detail removed the remaining safe explanation. Catherine broke her silence with one quiet question. If the warning had already been given, why had the request continued? Camilla opened her mouth and then stopped. Charles looked from the document to his wife. He ended the confrontation at that point, stating that he would review the original family instruction himself before any final decision. When the raised voices ceased, the most consequential period began. Charles took the file from the table and read it alone. No advisors, no family, no softening presence. Camilla had expected her husband to defend her. William had expected the king to defend Charlotte. For nearly an hour, neither received an answer. Behind a closed door, Charles faced a choice capable of wounding his wife or appearing to set aside his granddaughter's documented claim. He understood the symbolic weight of royal inheritance better than most. Objects inside the system carry meaning. A piece of jewelry is rarely only a piece of jewelry. It is a statement about belonging and continuity. The documentation before him stated that his wife had sought access to something explicitly promised to his granddaughter years earlier, in an older inventory deliberately updated. The wording of the instruction left little room for interpretation. The pearl set could not be permanently reassigned outside the designated family line without written approval from Charlotte's guardians while she remained a minor. A separate palace request carrying Camilla's household reference had attempted to move the pearls into a category that would have granted her routine ceremonial access. Even if permanent ownership had never been the stated goal, the request had advanced far enough to threaten the protection surrounding the inheritance. Charles closed the file. He did not summon William first. He called Camilla alone. Camilla knew the answer before Charles finished speaking. His voice was careful. The file remained closed between them, yet its contents had already defeated every argument she might have prepared. The pearls would be removed from her ceremonial options immediately. Charlotte's designation would be formally restored. Any future request involving the set would require the approval of William and Catherine. For the first time that day, Camilla did not contest the ruling. Charles spoke slowly because he understood the personal cost of the decision. The jeweler's proof was sufficient. The set would return to protected family storage under Charlotte's inheritance designation. The earlier household request was cancelled without exception. Camilla listened without interruption. Then she opened her handbag, removed a small handwritten note carrying the pearl's inventory number, and placed it on the table beside Charles. She did not look at him. She said that losing access to the jewelry was not what hurt most. What wounded her was the knowledge that William now believed she had knowingly tried to take something intended for Charlotte. Charles did not offer the reassurance she sought. He told her that the warning notation should have stopped the request the moment Charlotte's initials were noticed. He refused to describe the matter as harmless confusion. That refusal struck deeper than the decision itself. The consequences expanded almost at once. Charles ordered a review of several other jewelry access requests made during the same period, concerned that the pearl dispute had exposed weaknesses in the approval process for historic pieces. What had begun as one inheritance question now required the household to examine whether other records had been handled with insufficient care. William received written confirmation of the decision shortly afterward. He read it, folded the note once, and set it down without any expression of triumph. Catherine watched him. The claim had been protected, yet victory brought no satisfaction. He asked whether Camilla truly understood why the matter had become so serious. Catherine answered carefully. The pearls were secure, but the family was not. If the anger remained unaddressed, every future meeting would carry the same wound. Catherine urged Prince William to speak with Camilla privately once the formal decision had been recorded. She understood that protecting Charlotte's claim had been necessary, yet leaving the anger untouched would allow the same wound to reopen in every future family meeting. The conversation that followed contained no jewelers, no king, and no advisors. William arrived carrying nothing. Camilla noticed at once the absence of the cream-colored file that had earlier shattered her composure. This was no longer a hearing. It was personal. He sat opposite her in a quiet room and spoke Charlotte's name once, gently. This time Camilla looked away. William told her that his anger had never truly been about jewelry. He kept imagining Charlotte years hence, old enough to understand what had occurred, asking why something left to her had disappeared while her own father stood nearby and did nothing. That single imagined question had turned suspicion into resolve. He explained that ceremonial access and permanent entitlement were never the same thing, and that a child's documented inheritance could not be treated as flexible simply because another member of the family desired easier use. The weight of that future conversation with his daughter, he said, was what had driven him to bring the documentation into the open rather than allow the matter to remain buried in household paperwork. Camilla listened for a long moment before answering. She admitted that her place inside the monarchy had sometimes felt less secure than outside observers imagined. Important historic pieces had become symbols to her, visible signs that she had finally been accepted rather than merely tolerated. She recognized how shallow that desire could sound when spoken aloud, yet the need for recognition had slowly blurred her judgment. Then she said what William had been waiting to hear. She had seen Charlotte's initials on the inventory sheet. She had convinced herself the notation meant only future consideration rather than a binding inheritance designation. She acknowledged that she should have stopped the request the moment the wardrobe official pointed out those initials and should have sought full clarity instead of allowing the matter to continue under the phrase that it would be clarified internally. For William, the admission mattered because she was no longer contesting the evidence or claiming the documentation was an administrative error. She accepted that once the initials had been noticed, the decision to proceed became a choice rather than a misunderstanding. The quiet in the room after she finished speaking was heavier than any raised voice had been earlier in the day. William did not offer easy forgiveness. He told Camilla plainly that Charlotte could never become leverage in anyone's struggle for standing within the family. The inheritance designation was not a bargaining chip and never would be. He accepted her withdrawal of the earlier request, yet he made no pretense that trust between them had been restored. The relationship would remain more guarded from that point forward, shaped by the knowledge of what had been attempted and what had been exposed. Camilla asked for only one thing before he left the room. Someday, if William and Catherine permitted it, she wished to tell Charlotte herself that the pearls had always been hers. William gave no promise. He did not refuse either. The silence that followed carried the weight of unfinished business rather than resolution. By the following morning, the story had moved beyond the palace walls. What captured public attention was not the monetary value of the pearls, but the image at the center of the dispute. An older generation contesting something already promised to a young princess. Supporters viewed William as a protective father who had refused to allow a documented claim to be diluted. Critics weeks saw a private family matter turned uncomfortably public, with personal ambitions laid bare under the pressure of written records. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered around a newspaper kiosk where an evening paper carried a front-page declaration that Charlotte's pearls had been restored. When the paper was lifted toward television cameras, several people nearby began to applaud. That single moment captured the public mood more clearly than any official statement could have done. It revealed how quickly a household dispute over provenance could become a broader commentary on continuity, entitlement, and the difference between temporary access and lasting claim. William disliked the celebration that followed. He told Catherine he did not want their daughter growing up believing the pearls had caused a family conflict in her name. He had fought to protect her claim, yet the victory now felt strangely heavy. The public narrative simplified what had been a more complicated failure of judgment and procedure. Catherine reminded him that Charlotte deserved the inheritance without also carrying the bitterness attached to it. The pearls themselves were secure. The emotional cost of how they had been secured remained an open question inside the family. Palace communications confirmed only the central decision. The historic pearl set would remain under Princess Charlotte's designated family inheritance arrangement, protected for her future rather than available for unrestricted personal use. Written wishes would outrank convenience. That simple confirmation removed the argument from private emotion and placed it inside a clear principle. Charles understood the damage the public exposure had caused. He approved tighter written procedures for historic jewelry linked to named future recipients, requiring clearer authorization before any piece could move into another royal's regular use. The safeguard mattered because the dispute had shown how easily ceremonial access and future ownership could become confused once a request was allowed to advance past the first notation of a child's initials. William welcomed the change, but did not treat it as revenge. Camilla accepted that the new rules would apply to everyone, including her. In the end, there was no dramatic second claim, no hidden reversal, and no last-minute intervention. The decision held. The pearl set was catalogued under Charlotte's name, sealed within protected royal storage, and removed from Camilla's future ceremonial selections. William watched the final paperwork being completed with none of the triumph others might have expected. The jewelers formally restored the set to Princess Charlotte's designated inheritance record. Catherine and her husband were listed as responsible guardians until their daughter reached the appropriate age. When the updated inventory page was signed, the prince checked Charlotte's name himself, placed the pen down, and quietly said that no further action was necessary. Catherine felt relief rather than victory. She told William that their daughter should one day receive the pearls without also inheriting the anger that had surrounded them. Protecting Charlotte had mattered, but turning that protection into permanent bitterness would defeat part of what they had fought for. Camilla made her own decision soon afterward. She signed the written withdrawal of her previous request and accepted Charles's ruling without another challenge. Her earlier collapse now carried a deeper meaning. It had marked the instant when confidence gave way to the realization that position alone could not override a documented family promise. Charles also accepted responsibility. In a private conversation with William, the king acknowledged that his delay in confronting the uncertainty had allowed tension to grow. He strengthened the approval process afterward, ensuring that historic pieces attached to named recipients could not be casually moved into another person's regular use. The monarch had chosen clarity where hesitation had once created danger. William and Camilla did not suddenly become close. Their relationship remained more guarded, yet the private conversation between them prevented the dispute from becoming a permanent rupture. The prince accepted her withdrawal. She stopped contesting Charlotte's entitlement. That was enough to close the argument. Charlotte herself remained protected from the confrontation. One day she would receive more than pearls. She would inherit proof that a promise made in her name had been defended before she was old enough to defend it herself. The file was closed and archived. Charlotte's name remained on the page. Nobody challenged it again. Charles closed the final inventory and set it aside with the quiet finality of a man who understood both the cost of the decision and the necessity of it. William left the room without triumph. Catherine watched the formal restoration of the pearls with relief rather than satisfaction. Camilla signed the withdrawal and accepted that position alone could never override a documented promise made in a child's name. The private conversation between William and Camilla had prevented a permanent rupture, yet it had not restored easy trust. The tighter procedures Charles ordered ensured that no future request involving a named inheritance could advance past the first sight of a minor's initials without clear authorization. Outside the palace, the public saw only the restored claim and the image image of a young princess protected. Inside the household, the true measure of the day remained the hour Charles spent alone with the file, the moment Camilla's composure failed, and the quiet admission that followed. The pearls returned to protected storage under Charlotte's designation. The file was sealed. Charlotte's name stayed on the page. No further challenge was raised.